You're about to hear 10 true horror stories that actually happened. But the scariest part? These aren't just ghost stories. These are stalkers, disappearances, faces in windows, and one of them might be watching you right now.
When I was living in a small San Diego apartment, I often walked my dog, Luna, around midnight. One night, I let her out in the backyard while I grabbed my phone from inside. I stepped back out and saw her stiffen, ears perked, hackles raised, staring into the pitch-black corner of the fence. Thinking she'd spotted a raccoon, I shined my phone's flashlight. No animal, just an oddly twisted silhouette between two palms. My heart pounded. As I approached, I realized the silhouette wasn't a tree branch at all. It was a person, crouched, watching me. Before I could react, someone tapped my shoulder from behind. I spun, but I was alone. When I dared to look back at the fence, the crouched figure had vanished without a sound. Luna whimpered, and I sprinted inside, locking every door. I never let her out alone after that. In Northern California, I once went camping near Lake Tahoe with friends. We pitched our tents just before sunset and started a small fire. Around midnight, I woke to a strange clicking noise outside my tent, like someone tapping on a walking stick. I zipped open the flap and shone my flashlight into the trees. A shadow retreated between the pines. I called for my friends, and we grabbed flashlights, venturing into the dark woods. About 50 feet from camp, we found footprints, boots I didn't recognize, even though no other campers were supposed to be in that area. The prints circled our campsite and vanished near the lake. My friend swore he saw someone's silhouette on the opposite shore, just standing there. We packed up and left before dawn, too spooked to stay. When I first moved to Los Angeles for work, I rented a room in a vintage apartment in Hollywood. One morning, I woke up to the sound of someone humming outside my bedroom door. I assumed it was my roommate getting ready for her morning coffee. But when I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. A few days later, the humming returned, louder and more melodic, coming from the kitchen. I got up to find my roommate staring at me, confused. She hadn't been out of her room. We checked the entire apartment, doors locked, windows shut. The humming stopped abruptly when we flipped on the lights. That evening, I noticed fresh scratches on the hallway walls, just outside my door. Shaken, I moved out that weekend. I live in a quiet suburb outside Sacramento, and one afternoon I decided to take my skateboard to the local park. I usually ride until sunset, but that day I lost track of time and stayed until after dark. As I skated down a dimly lit path back home, I noticed someone following me a few yards behind, keeping pace on a bike. Every time I glanced back, the rider would slow, pretending to tie a shoelace or look at their phone. I started to speed up, ducking under street lamps until I reached my neighborhood. He was still there, just beyond the last lamp's glow. When I finally reached my driveway, the biker stopped at the corner and watched me go inside. I locked the door and called my roommate. He looked out and told me nobody was on the street. The next morning, I found tire tracks on my lawn, as if they'd circled my house all night. During my junior year at UCLA, I lived in an off-campus house with 3 roommates. One night, our power went out on a stormy evening. We lit candles and settled into the living room to share stories. Around 2 a.m., I heard someone stumble onto our front porch, whining and mumbling. I peeked through a darkened window and saw a drenched man, disoriented, tapping on our door. My roommates wanted to help, but something felt off. His eyes were unblinking, and his voice crackled like someone who hadn't slept in days. When we finally opened a crack, he begged for shelter, saying he'd been in a car crash nearby. My roommate offered to call 911, and as soon as we took out our phones, his demeanor changed. He snarled and bolted into the night. We never found out who he was, but the next day, our neighbors reported someone trying every front door in the neighborhood, drenched and incoherent.
A few summers ago, I rented a beach house in Malibu with a couple of friends. One evening, we decided to have a bonfire on the sand after midnight. We played guitar and toasted marshmallows until we were the only group left on the shore. That's when I heard footsteps behind me on the sand. Slow, deliberate steps. I turned to see a barefoot man wearing a hoodie, crouched low as if trying not to be seen. I asked what he was doing, and he vanished into the darkness before I could see his face. My friends and I huddled closer, scanning the shoreline. The next morning, we found footprints circling our fire pit, leading off the beach into the dunes. We left a day early, unsettled by the idea that someone had been watching us so intently. When I was 16 and living in Orange County, I worked at a 24-hour convenience store near the freeway. One late shift, around 3 a.m., a scruffy-looking guy came in and asked for directions to a nearby gas station. He had this unsettling calm about him, no urgency in his voice, but his eyes never left me. I gave him directions, but he didn't move. Instead, he leaned on the counter and stared at the doorway behind me. I turned to see what he was looking at, but nothing was there. When I turned back, he was gone. I checked the aisles, back room, and restrooms. No sign of him. A few minutes later, my manager arrived to relieve me. I told him about the guy. He nodded and said that a couple of nights ago, someone matching that description was found passed out behind the store. We called security, but the man had disappeared. The creepiest part, he dropped a single pressed flower on the counter when he walked out. Last winter, I went hiking in Big Bear with my cousin. We found a trail that was supposedly less traveled. By dusk, we decided to head back, but the trailhead marker was gone, either storm damage or human interference. As we tried to retrace our steps, mist began to roll in, making everything look alike. I kept hearing branches snap behind us, but every time we stopped to listen, it fell silent. Suddenly, a flashlight beam swept across us from the ridge above. We waved, thinking maybe other hikers were behind us, but the beam flicked off. My cousin whispered that he felt eyes on him. Panicked, we jogged downhill until we reached our car, only to find muddy footprints around it, as if someone had circled us while we were gone. We left that night, both too shaken to talk until we reached the city lights. I moved into a duplex in Santa Rosa last year. My neighbor was a quiet guy who mostly kept to himself, never waved, never chatted. One night, I was watching TV when I heard a thud on my bedroom window. I lived on the ground floor. I got up, heart racing, and peeked through the blinds. No one. The next night, the thud returned, louder. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. By the time the dispatcher asked for my address, I saw a face pressed against the glass, eyes wide, breathing heavily. I slammed my back to the wall and the face disappeared. Cops arrived in minutes and searched the perimeter, finding muddy handprints on the sill. I moved out that weekend. Later, my old neighbor was arrested for stalking another tenant across the street. I never went near that window again. While attending a summer program in Berkeley, I stayed in a dormitory that was almost a century old. Legend had it a former alumnus died in one of the classrooms upstairs. One night, around 1 a.m., I returned from the library. The hallway lights flickered as I walked past classroom 302. I heard a guttural whisper calling my name. Alex? Alex? I froze, certain I was alone. I shook my head and walked on, but the whisper followed me down the hall. I sprinted to my room and slammed the door, only to find the corridor dead silent. The next morning, I asked a professor about it. She admitted 302 was sealed off after someone had heard voices. I never went near that part of the building again.